This is the London Fintech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is London Fintech Podcast, episode 123. Brought to you in association with Smart Pension, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Wynne, co-founder of Smart Pension, or actually I think they're now called the Smart Group, he will tell us, to dive into the super big picture topic of how strategy evolves. After a couple of recent detailed episodes on financialising and making investable previously uninvestable asset classes, today we head for the sunny uplands of the generals surveying their battle plans. It's an appropriate change as, if your detailed products, creating them, marketing, selling them, as well as delivering them, work out great, then before you know it, you too will be needing a new strategy. Well, he's well placed to discuss this topic for a number of reasons. He was last on the show some almost 3 years ago, when he was telling us how to go from 0 to 75,000 clients in less than 2 years. Mighty impressive, but by now they run into hundreds of thousands of clients, and Smart Pension are number 2 in the UK direct contribution pension area, and hence perhaps in need of an even bigger, better plan. What happens to the rare fintech, and there is a very rare fintech, that's so successful on this small and divided island of ours that it starts to bump up against national borders? What do you do then? Secondly, in a parallel incarnation, Will's other business, Arena Flowers, which is over 12 years old, ships millions of stems of flowers, including all of those of moonpig. Another astonishing feat. So once again, what do you do when you succeed above your wildest dreams? Where do you go from there? There's a whole ton of other reasons why Will says he knows something about strategy, going back to private equity and raising, as we told the story last time round, £100 million for charity in his spare time at eBay. Most people haven't done that either. Anyway, having buffed his medals for him, I've also set a high hurdle of expectation of a real masterclass. Not a single word of waffle allowed. After all, that's my role in this gig. Plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Hi Will, thanks for joining me today.
Hello Mike, thanks for having me back.
So it's a beautiful spring-like sunny April morning here in Paddington, albeit in mid-February. Not much of winter this year. And you were saying that actually you're flying Wharf skiing next week, which is very nice for you. And then talking about this whole globalisation thing, which we'll get round to in a little bit of a while, you were saying that, of course, it's all sexy and exciting and all that, but a certain number of air miles are called for when you go global, as opposed to in Paddington, where you can get an Uber and go to your next meeting or something like that.
Yes, we've actually done a slight reorganisation of the business this year, simply to allow myself and Andrew, my co-founder, and a number of the senior team to get on planes. So I think got a week off next week because we've just finished a big strategic round. So I'm just having a bit of a break.
And your big strategic round, you are too modest to mention, is a strategic investment by the world's largest bank.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, JPMorgan have invested. JPMorgan is, I think, the top 10 companies in the world have listed or something of that nature, and they're the world's largest financial institution. So that's somewhat of an awesome outcome for us, which we were chuffed about. As you can imagine, it was a ton of work. And so yeah, I'm going to take a quick week off next week, and then I have a week back here, and then we're going to fly to Australia for a 45-minute meeting, and then I'm going to fly straight from there to New York for 4 days worth of meetings to go through some other stuff. So that might give you an indication of the territories that we're looking at with particular interest. But yeah, that was unfortunate that those two things piled on top of each other. But yeah, the air miles are going to be racking up. So I don't know why we managed to choose two markets that are pretty much on the opposite side of the planet. And actually, if you go to New York, it's no quicker to get to Australia either. So it's not as if you can do any shortcuts. Yeah. But the four biggest markets in the world in pensions are the US, which is $25 trillion. The UK and Japan are neck and neck at $3 trillion. US dollars, that is, and then Australia is $2-3 trillion as well. So that can explain to you why our top three targets are the UK, America and Australia.
Yes, and it's quite a big world. And without getting you on your favourite subject at the moment of pensions, where you will know a gazillion times more than me, the tiny little bit that I learned from the Odd Fortune cookie is that Australia were quite in the lead, innovative in terms of pushing auto-enrolment and things, which is one of the things that got your thing going.
No, that's right. So they've been at this for 20 years. So whilst it's a smallish population, they've been accumulating DC defined contribution assets for a long time. The employers are forced to pay for it basically, and it's a chunk. Surprisingly, though, what's interesting that because it's been around for so long, their tech is very outdated and not particularly sophisticated. That's maybe a bit harsh, but they've built it a long time ago, so therefore they haven't quite got the benefits of modern technology. And they've had two what they're called royal commissions out there, which are basically a regulatory review of the market, and there is change coming to that market, which we, as a disruptor and a tech-enabled modern business, we like regulatory-driven change because we can be nimble and capitalise on opportunity. But no, they've done a brilliant job over there. What's slightly strange, actually, about the Australian market, to be a slight sidetrack, is that despite the fact they've been doing this for so long, they haven't really got any thought. They haven't got a very sophisticated decumulation market.
What market?
Decumulation being, so accumulation is what you're saving into your pension.
Yes.
Decumulation is when you start to draw down on it and sort of take your money out. But they've been so focused on building your pot up that people basically haven't actually done a great deal of work around what kind of sophisticated solutions you might have for then how you gradually draw down your pot whilst ensuring you don't run out of money, ensuring that you can cover rainy day things. So it's despite being such a mature an innovative market and ahead of the game, there's still lots of opportunity there, which is surprising, but good news for us and my MRs.
Yes, indeed. And have you flown across the Pacific before? I did it once. It's very big.
Yes, I have. My wife is a Kiwi, so I actually flew, in Christmas I flew past Australia and then back. So this time, so I've been both ways. It's just basically, no matter how you look at it, New Zealand is literally pretty much, I think it's the opposite side of the world.
It's antipodes, isn't it? Like, you stick a line through the globe from us now.
Exactly. You end up, if you go from New Zealand, you pop up at sort of Portugal. So we're basically the opposite side. So whichever way you do it, it's miles away.
And I did know somebody once who had to fly all the way to Japan. I think in the old days, when you did it via Alaska, it was 18 hours, which is still nowhere near Oz and New Zealand. Who had to go to Tokyo for one meeting, for 1.5 hour meeting. So this meeting obviously is an important meeting, but you can't kind of call in on Skype. It didn't cross your mind.
No, basically, is a short answer to that. We'll do some other stuff around it as well. But yeah, no, broadly, co-founders showing up and having a good conversation, hopefully, with some interesting people. So it's a bit like that scene in one of the Batmans when Batman flies all the way to Hong Kong to say no to a bloke and says, you could have called me or whatever. I'm not trying to compare myself to Batman. But anyway, but it is a kind of slightly ridiculous, but also sometimes, face-to-face is valuable. And actually, the time zones also, and that's the other thing about Australia, is New Zealand's worse, but the time zones are, it's really tricky. I used to work, when I was working in eBay, we worked with the west coast of the States, so it was an 8-hour time difference, and so you'd have a little overlap at the end of our day with the start of their day, but when it gets to 10, 11 hours, it's just a total nightmare.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's a topic in innovation itself, which is that various markets innovate, or at least they innovate in different dimensions, but then other dimensions of any given market will remain static for a hell of a long time. Prime example being in airlines, they've innovated a lot in terms of fuel economy, all that kind of stuff. I think I saw something recently saying the Airbus 380, whatever it is, that vast quadruple-decker aeroplane hasn't really taken off and they haven't sold very many, so that innovation didn't work. But the innovation, of course, which hasn't at all gathered speed, pun intended, since when I were a lad, when Concorde would go supersonically and people were saying, oh yes, this is the future. Now, without going into all that kind of stuff, because we must talk about strategy, although it does relate to strategy in a way, the airline market has been relatively successful in keeping prices down and getting volumes up, but it's been spectacularly unsuccessful for 50 years in actually flapping its wings any faster and getting there quicker.
Yeah, true, although I saw a news article this week about the Gulfstream the Gulfstream? No, the Jetstream even, sorry. It would be a bit bad news if you're on a 747 in the Gulfstream. The Jetstream was so fast the other day that a British Airways or Virgin or whatever flight actually flew over it was 220 miles an hour, so actually technically it was going supersonically, although actually it's not, because that's not how you measure it, because it's relative to the ground rather than whatever. Relative to the surrounding air, there's supersonic. But anyway, yes, you're right. I mean, and it's interesting that people thought you need these giant hotels in the sky, but actually it's been more about the smaller jets that do things more efficiently and more quietly. So it's interesting. So things don't always go in the same direction that you would expect. I think we're all waiting for Elon Musk's rockets to fly us from one side of the planet to the other, hopefully not with a spectacular explosion along the way.
No, indeed. Right. Okay, so that leads nicely into strategy. So maybe we can start with the very basics, because it's one of these words that we all use, but we don't necessarily use it the same. When you say strategy, and when you're going to talk about strategy, what do you mean by strategy? What's strategy?
So the obvious thing is to go strategic versus tactical. Tactical is, so what are we doing today, tomorrow, next week to get things done? And they're not necessarily value accretive, or they're not necessarily part of the master plan. They're just what we're doing day to day. Strategy is when you're saying, well, the way I see it anyway, and the way I think we see it, is broadly, where's our destination, where are we going, what's our overall story, what's the narrative, that sort of thing. So there's a piece around that story, so you might have a mission statement, which might be sort of fluffy. We've got one, I'll read you our mission statement. It's, our mission is to transform pension savings and financial well-being across all generations around the world. So it's suitably
It's to be big. It's bigger than it was.
So one of my colleagues, Martin, says, well, I'm a bit disappointed we've only included planet Earth in that. But it's kind of it's a fluffy sort of broad direction of travel. That's the mission statement, so it kind of tells you where we're going. But strategy is more detailed than analytical, so it's okay.
Top 4 markets or whatever you were saying.
Exactly. You look at the top 4 markets, you look at what's in those spaces, you look at what's kind of... So it's just breaking it all down. So it starts quite fluffy, but it becomes very analytical and detailed quite quickly. Michelle, who's joined us as our Chief Strategy Officer from Legal & General, actually, is awesome and is marshalling all that kind of information around where should we play, what do we need to, what does our proposition need to look like to get there, all these kinds of things. So it's kind of an overall summation of everything that we're trying to achieve in the medium to long term. So I would put that as an 18-month to 5-year window broadly.
Right, and so going backwards then, if you rewind to when you and Andrew were sitting in a pub and you thought, oh, I know what really fascinates me. Andrew, does it fascinate you too? Auto-enrolment. Oh, yes, very exciting. And then you had a strategy, the two of you.
Yeah.
To what extent did you have specific strategies which sort of lasted for a year or so, and then you sort of iterated? Or did you kind of like basically, sort of set sail and then keep making the strategy up as it went along? Do you prefer a discrete process of every now and then revisiting it on some off-site, or do you keep them mutating it?
It's a really great question. So when to answer, and I'll answer a different question if that makes sense. So when I was at eBay, I was thinking about doing an MBA, and I was thinking about, a friend of mine was working in flowers, and I was thinking about doing that. The first thing, there's quite a hairy thing to jump out of a nicely paid job, and
it's quite crazy, yes.
Yeah, lovely career path all ahead of you, and all that ease, comfort and ease to go and start something which you don't know if it will work or not. So frankly, in both cases, with Arena Flowers and also with Smart Pension, now we call it Smart basically, but anyway, it was broadly going to give this a crack. There's somewhere to play for us, so we think having looked at I did my sort of mini analysis is it an interesting market? Yes, £2 billion flower market, $42 trillion pensions market, half of which is DC, half of which is DB. Is there good competition? Yes, no, not really. Is there a segment where we can play? Yes, there is. So online flowers, or in the case of pensions, it was the auto-enrolment thing and the SME end. Is there good competition there? Not really, certainly not in the pensions piece. So you go, well, okay, this looks like something which could work, but frankly, I don't really know, and you're just going to have to jump to find out. So at the early stages, it's pretty tactical. It's like, can this work? Is it working? Are we being able to demonstrate any kind of traction or KPIs or metrics that indicate that we are going to be successful? Do people like what we're doing? And so for the first year, and actually with Smart for longer than that, because of the nature of the market we're in, which is that auto-enrollment started in October 2012 and ended in February 2019, so the phase 1 of onboarding all existing employers. So then it was like, we're just going to capitalise as well as we can on this one thing, and to raise the next round of money, you had to prove that if we started off, can we do it at all? That was the first raise. Second raise was, okay, you've proven you can get a credit master trust and so on, now build a platform, fine, do that and get it live. So then we did that, and that was working, and our KPIs were good, so we go, okay, you're acquiring customers at a rate that makes sense economically, and therefore this will have value in the future. Here's some more money to go and push it. And then we got a strategic on board in the form of Legal & General, which is amazing for lots of different reasons. And then we had our last raise was our Series B, penultimate raise was Series B, which is then, okay, right, now what's the world like after auto-enrolment?
And roughly how much money have you raised in total by now?
We have raised about 45 to 50 million pounds, give or take.
Right, fairly soon you're talking sort of reasonable money, aren't you?
Yeah, it is quite bizarre actually. Those numbers are, you have to sort of say, we're going to look after that money when it arrives, right? We're going to make sure it's locked down. So yeah, no, it's not insignificant sums. But yeah, so the first couple of stages of that were very, very tactical and very execution focused, because you're still proving that the model can work.
And you're proving yourselves as a team. You say at the beginning, we can do this. We can set out a little coracle, and if there's any leaks, we'll fill them. And you do.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, actually, we can stick a sail on this, and then you do.
Exactly.
And as you say, and this will be the generic for all fintechs or startups at the beginning, which is that it's very much staggered. People will fund you for the next lot, but they want you to prove that actually you can deliver stuff. And then, I was about to say incrementally, but perhaps it's exponentially or logarithmically, whatever I mean, which is that, you keep raising 10 times more than the last time because you've got a 10 times bigger goal. So I get that bit, the phased thing.
And just on that point as well, the other thing is what I would say is that the one thing and has definitely been the case for both the businesses I've set up, is that whatever you think is the case when you jump in, you're going to be wrong, right? So you need to course correct, you need to be nimble. I mean, there's all the bits about it. It's hard to build a business as well as run it at the same time, but that always happens, that's just hard. But that's a painful first 18 months always, I think. But yes, whatever you get into, you are not going to be correct about your assumptions, so you're going to have to figure things out, be nimble, and then you'll gradually get more and more information, you'll build a better proposition, a better business, and therefore it makes it harder for the bloke coming behind you or the lady coming behind you to fill the gap, because you've kind of filling it as you go.
Yes, you've obviously very psychic because you just read and totally ruined my...
Oh, sorry.
my one quote I've got, my extensive research, which was the famous one from von Moltke, although I did actually, by looking this up, find out that he didn't say precisely this is paraphrasing, the Austrian general, who said no plan survives first contact with the enemy, which is you do all the planning you like, and then the battle's going, oh, bloody hell.
Yeah.
And then your sort of strategy meets experience, in a way.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll give you two examples from Smart. So I'm a digital background, we're a tech-led business, and our best channel was sending letters in the post to employers, which is, it was not very sexy and techie and digital. We did a very good job of digital stuff, but it was a very effective channel for us. Another channel was the advisor channel. So I'm talking about IFAs, bookkeepers, accountants, payroll bureaus, kind of intermediaries who have the ear of the SME. And we thought those guys would be wrapped up, sewn up, but they weren't. And so actually by the end of it, half of our new sign-ups were coming from those old school channels. We had a shoe leather team going around the country, knocking on doors and meeting with people. So that was a £1 million bet we took when we didn't have that many millions in the bank to build that team. And it was a good bet, but it was a bit like, it feels a bit weird to be sending letters and sending people out in their car to go and knock on the door. But actually that worked really, really well. So, you know, whatever works, and that's the key.
No, absolutely. And I've given this example many times. I mean, both yourselves and Blue Motor Finance, who the FT made the fastest FS growing business in Europe, ended up one way or another with the same, should we call it, regional shoe leather to digital London, seamless waterfront, because no matter how digital one can think, and the likes of Revolut have done extremely well. I see they've got 6 million clients. I shall have to eat humble pie because many years ago I was flashing my Monzo card around and you were flashing your Revolut when it was Blur versus Oasis days.
Right, and I remember that.
I've now got a Revolut card as well. So you won that one. But there is still the rare business like a Revolut, which basically doesn't really do any marketing at all, but suddenly ends up with 6 million clients. But for other businesses, and Blue Motor Finance broke into car financing, which has been going around for a century and is an utterly sewn-up market, and you guys have become the number 2. I think it's outside the government. I think the government's number 1. So
yeah, in terms of number of employers, we've got more employers on our platform than any other provider in the UK, apart from Nest, which burns £100 million a year.
Which is phenomenal. And Nest, for the listeners, is the government-funded organisation. So the government is subsidising, to a great extent, the only competitor to you, and you're still outperforming. So yes, this is what's been proven to do well. Now, having said that, you're clearly an excellent entrepreneur. Bob Jones, slightly older than you, is also an excellent entrepreneur because, without getting too detailed on this, it's easier said than done. Businesses tend to do the shoe leather bit really well, or have a bunch of people going around speaking to accountants really well, or they tend to do the sort of the tech thing. So actually, having some uniform waterfront is a very impressive execution. Okay, so the strategy, you have the strategy as explained, you've got these sort of incremental deliverables, as it were, strategies to get you to the next round, this awful sort of funding thing. And there's kind of an iteration going on here. And then you mentioned, slightly in passing, which is perhaps further down the road than the average fintech in London, which is that as part of this successful iteration, you end up having a bit more dough, and you actually end up being able to employ somebody to do it properly, as opposed to you and Andrew doing it in a pub or the odd board meeting where you will get together and scratch your head a little bit. And then you've got somebody who's actually really doing the math properly. How does that phase change work? Would you hire someone who knows 10 times you, and then they come along and tell you you've got it completely wrong and you should be doing this, that or the other, or is it a bit more interactive?
No, we are still very much involved, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think we're running a very different business.
What is the business? Just press pause. So what do you see as a business now then?
Well, so we started out as a pure auto-enrollment play, so what we were doing is helping we targeted a segment of the market which no one else was going to be able to target apart from the government with all their money. And that went very well. So that's a very narrow, defined thing we did, and that got us into a sector which is one of the largest, it's not an asset class, but if it were an asset class, pensions would be the largest asset class on earth, based, I think bigger than property. But anyway, it's huge. So it got us into that space, and having done a good job of executing this particular area, then we're expanding out. So Smart, we are in the UK, we are Smart Pension. We are a defined contribution provider, so that means that you can what you put in, you get back out with whatever it grows, rather than in a final salary scheme. And so we are going from having started in a small end, we're going up through to larger employers who are not choosing to do pensions because of auto-enrollment and the government's got a big stick. They're choosing to do it because it's a good thing and that's good for their employees and all the rest of it. And that's a very, very large market. So, and actually in that piece, we're having success at the bottom end from our origins and also at the top end where there are no intermediaries to close the door and say, no, you've got to go through.
For the sake of argument, without naming names, you go knock on the door of HSBC or BP or Shell, some vast organisation.
Yeah, there you'll find that they have their own internal team, so therefore you do actually have a conversation because they're interested in tech and interested in a great platform for their members or their staff. Whereas when you're in the middle bit, you've got a whole bunch of intermediaries who are very well paid and its job is to...
Gatekeeper.
Yeah, so that's fine. So we're working through that. And so in the UK, we think we'll be, in this medium to long term, we'll be one of the main players in that space in the UK. So that's Smart Pension, the provider, and there we are the pension provider. We take the regulatory risk, we run the operation, we do the distribution and marketing, we do everything. The one thing we don't do is manage assets. We're not interested in that. There are lots of good asset managers. So we have Legal & General, we have JPMorgan and various other people that we can put on our platform for the funds for our members. So that's Smart Pension. But interestingly, when we come to a strategy point, when in our Series B about a year ago, a bit more than a year, 18 months ago, that was where we were saying, right, we are approaching the end of auto enrollment, and we have some ideas around international, we have some ideas around different products, and we're going to look at those things, and we're going to spend some of this money we're raising. We're mostly going to finish off auto enrollment. We're also going to spend money on thinking about where we're going to go next. And so we hired a chap called Dan, who's our director of international, to go and review the entire world. He's the first day, there's your desk. First things first, give us a list of the top 10 countries to go to over the next few years. I'll see you in 6 weeks. So he did a very, very analytical piece of work on that over 6 months. It was a good time, actually, because it was just after Brexit vote.
Oh, yes, I remember this idea. We were going to leave, weren't we?
Yeah, right, exactly. Maybe when this goes up, that'll still be, we'll have left or not. Maybe we'll all be eating out of a bin, I don't know. But anyway, and on this war on the streets. But no, that was a good time to be calling the Department of International Trade to say, we're a British fintech looking to export our services. Can you help? I think they replied within about 20 minutes. Because that was one thing we did to figure out whether there's something there. Another thing we did was hire another chap called Richard, who was our head of strategic partnerships, and he went basically elephant hunting. So his task was, can you go and see if there are large financial institutions and the like who'd be interested in talking to us about what we've built in the UK? And they both came back with a pretty decent haul. So the first one, the obvious one is what Dan wants, not obvious, but the more intuitive one is that the world, especially the developed worlds, they've got aging demographic, they've got massive structural deficits, and they've got massive national debt, so therefore they want to privatise this thing. So that's auto enrollment, that's been successful, and there are lots of countries doing that. So that's not one opportunity. The other opportunity was a bit less obvious, but it's just that the large financial institutions are interested in being involved in this asset class because they see it growing and growing and growing over the coming years, and so they would then go, okay, well, if we want to be involved in this asset class, how do we best do that? And if you then do the analysis, you probably end up at our door, and so that's why we end up having conversations with very large people. So then we go, okay, that's pretty exciting and interesting, but then you then go, okay, well, how do we figure out where to go first and which clients to choose and all the rest of it? So that was where we start to get strategic from being very tactical. That was the beginning of it, and we're now 18 months beyond that process where we've got JPM on the cap table and various other countries we're talking to, and to go from doing the UK business, distributing online through the advisors and all the rest of it for the UK auto enrollment to what we're doing now it's a different organisation altogether. So if you build from about 15 engineers to 80 and many more being hired, it has to be run in a different way, and you have to build UX function, you have to build, there's all these different functions you have to build, so it's a different business to run. And often people will say, as I alluded to earlier on, people will say that the people who start a business will never be there at the end when it gets big, and so Andrew and I we recognise that that's often the case, and so but we are here to prove we think that that's not the case, and actually we are enjoying it more and more, actually, I would say, because the hardest bit was the beginning. And this is the fun bit where you get to think about big things and try and execute big things.
Yes, indeed. Well, all generalisations are generalisations. So it may be generally true that not many people can, but that is not the same as it's always true that no one can do these things. So in terms of strategy there, one of the things that occurs to me is a bit an organic one, and having mentioned Revolut, various people have said to me that one of the things that Nick has done well at Revolut is that he sort of delegates, crypto. Will, you go and do crypto, and it delegates to me, you go and do investments or something like that. And having been a guest on a podcast earlier this week, my voice is slightly hoarse because I'm just recovering from having had the Black Death and the plague at the same time, which was rather unfortunate. And a couple of days ago, I recovered even less. And anyway, an American podcast, Paypod podcast, I was a guest for a change, and they were asking about success and why success of being in fintech, and I quoted the sort of 1600, as you know, my background interest in East India Company and these kind of things. And in 1600, the UK was 2% of global GDP. All we had to export was wool and a little bit of tin. Literally everything we needed, we had to sell wool to the continent and bring it back. And unlike all of the other European nations, including the Dutch to a large extent, but certainly the Portuguese and certainly the Spanish, basically England in those days was a minarchist state, minimum possible state, and it just said to people, okay, you've got the Muscovy, you've got the Moscow route, and you've got the westward route, and you've got the south route. Go and do it. And it's a little, I was reminded about what you're saying there, is that one person has got this market, and they go off and do it, and they go off and do it. And if these teams come back, some of them are successful, some of them aren't, if your core business is solid, then actually you grow into those very well. Now, actually, in the case of England, it wasn't particularly solid because the people who had to go off and trade in the spice route and all that kind of stuff were given a bunch of wool to go and flog in the tropics, which turned out not to sell very well. So you hear this stuff about Britain ripping off the empire and all this rubbish. We actually lost a fortune. So the East India Company, which was in Philpott Lane next to where I worked for a long time at Kleinwatts, they literally, in the later 17th century, had wool makers and cotton makers trying to burn their building down and were attacked. And they were massively attacked economically because we were just losing all our silver reserves because the only thing we had that Indians or Spice Islands or the Chinese wanted was our silver. They, funnily enough, didn't want wool in the tropics. So anyway, that was an example that actually it took a long time for us to be successful there. But what you're saying here, and I'm back in my mind, was one factor that you haven't mentioned, which is that I assume that, roughly speaking, your core business is actually a successful and profitable one. You say you don't do the investment management. So therefore, everything else you're doing is literally added value. There are plenty of businesses out there, whether it's Revolut or Monzo cards, or whether it's P2Ps, that actually, or whether it's FX, that are actually having problems with core profitability. If your core business isn't particularly profitable, it's quite hard to expand out of that. If you've got a core business like auto-enrollment, which is growing and growing and growing, you're getting hundreds of thousands of clients and it's making some money. I assume it's much easier to grow from there, at which point you don't get the problem of how do we grow into an adjacent area, and I see other fintechs trying to do it, but if their core hasn't worked, that's not really growing to another area. That's still sort of being in search of some way of making money. Yeah, app banks being a good example. You then end up with the opposite problem, which is you've got a rose bush and it's growing all over the place, and you need to sort of prune it back a little bit. I
forgot to finish off my point earlier on, which is that we're a provider in the UK, but we're also doing a smart pension. But also the smart platform, which is our platform, we can sell that to other providers. So, for example, we've done a deal in Ireland. Let me just talk you through that. So in Ireland, we're working with New Ireland Assurance, which is the second largest insurer, which is owned by Bank of Ireland, which is the largest bank in Ireland. And we're working with them hand in glove to build a platform for them. But they will do the distribution, they will be the brand above the door, they will take the regulatory risk, do all that good stuff. So that's leveraging what we've done before in the UK and then monetizing it elsewhere. So the Revolut model might be, they would go, actually no, we're going to go in there as smart pension, and I'm going to take over the world as smart pension, or I'm going to take over the world as Revolut, which is a mighty ballsy play, if I may be so bold.
And probably only Amazon have got away with that. And Amazon has certainly done the super setting. 1 minute it's books, then you blink and they're doing cloud or something.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon are an incredible business. I suppose you could argue Google as well. But if you look at actually how many countries Amazon are in, they're not in that many, actually. You'll be surprised at how few they are in.
But they've been very successful in supersetting the products.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fine. Absolutely. But yeah, so to your point, so people said, we got asked, what are you going to do after an auto-enrollment lot? That was the first one. The second one we get asked a lot is when we said we're doing a platform as a service play where actually our UK, as a provider, we can resell what we're doing elsewhere with partners in the UK or abroad. And they say, well, that's why would you do that? It's because you've got a nice business here. Well, it's actually, this can be a 10x of what we currently have. In order to go into each country as a brand separately would require incredible amounts of capital and more brain power and management time than we have right now to do that. It would just be very, very difficult, and we don't think it's the smart play. What we think is a smart play, excuse the pun, is we very much want to win in the UK as smart pension the provider, but then we also think that we can leverage 200 years of history and massive balance sheets and distribution from partners, selected top partners in selected top countries, and that we help make them successful, they help therefore make us successful, and we would share in the assets accumulation. We would charge fees on the assets as they accumulate like we do in the UK, so we get that building revenue stream in each country. It's obviously a lot less than we do when we're doing it ourselves. That allows us to do a lot, but actually still not lose our minds. The third question we get asked a lot is, are you trying to do too much? Are you bonkers? And then we can explain how we're doing it and our strategies for how we're executing. Actually, if you think it through correctly, then actually you can do an awful lot without going completely mad.
Yes, and also depending on how much of a twinkle in your eye you can manage. One of the answers to those questions, especially when it's sort of fundraising, is yes, we are crazy, and if we weren't crazy, we wouldn't be so ambitious, but we're not stupid.
Yeah.
So we're taking these risks, and this is what we're doing to manage them. And, dear VC in round 57, do you want to invest in a company that's ambitious or not? Mm-hmm. And it's grounded ambition. So one of the ways always to take on criticism is say, yes, that's completely true, and then add a but, of course. Now, there's one thing you said there which actually is interesting on two levels. So at a very abstract level, I'd say that one of the things for strategy as you evolve the strategy is getting beyond this awful thing about dualism or mental abstraction or categories. Are you this or are you that? You say to a kid, do you want to be an accountant or do you want to be a poet? Well, there's no particular bloody reason you can't be an accountant and a poet. Maybe many people don't, but you can still do them both. Now, one of the things that I've often said, and it's a very useful low-res JPEG because it's actually pretty accurate, but like all low-res JPEGs, they're low-res JPEGs, is by and large I've categorised what I have to in a sentence. And when asked, the fintech phenomena in London as being two different things. So this is where the dualism is coming in. The first is predominantly what's on the podcast, which is new providers of FS to individuals and companies. That's the fintech, if you like, and that's the smaller part. The larger phenomenon, which is less frequently on the show, are the tech fintechs, if you like. New providers of tech, new providers of IT to the FS industry. Mm-hmm. Very, very different businesses. So that's the low-res JPEG. I've said it many times that one's one or the other. Now, interestingly, when I speak to insurtechs, so a good example, because last year we had a few young insurtechs and they're just getting going, and I say to them, well, look, are you actually going out there to try and build all this stuff and build a brand and flog it all and da-di-da-di-da-di, or you're actually building a platform and you're quite happy for people to white label it and da-di-da-di-da-di. Now, without being rude, unfortunately, I had several, so nobody can pin it down to any of them. The real answer, of course, is look, we're just trundling down the runway. We don't mind whether we turn west or east. We just want to get the wheels off the ground. Yeah. That kind of stuff. And that's the honest answer to that. And that can be the only thing, which is, look, whatever flies, flies. But it's interesting that you've got beyond this dualism, you've got beyond this X or Y, and you're seeing no conflict of interest, although people are asking the question, or no real choice between we have to be Smart Pension in our own name, doing our things our way, or we have a platform.
That's right, and it's actually...
Both.
We're both, yeah. Andrew loves that, both. Andrew, my co-founder. It's actually a massive, massive advantage having both. So we've specifically at a board about 6 months ago, I wanted it to be re-minuted because it was saying we were pivoting from being Smart Pension provider to being a platform. And I said that's absolutely categorically not the case, and I don't want anyone to be under that misapprehension. The reality is that we are a successful provider in the UK and we will continue to be a successful provider in the UK. And we have a platform business, which is nascent and a different business model. But the key thing is they are incredibly synergistic. I think that if we were an asset manager as well, I think we might struggle to do both. But we're not an asset manager. We don't think that the world doesn't need another asset manager. So on the basis we're not an asset manager, so you go to a potential platform partner, big bank, let's say, and they say, well, we've done a roadshow, a beauty parade, and we've seen all the various people. Tell me why you can build a platform that's going to have 1 million members on it. So, well, this one over here has got hundreds of thousands on it already. Oh, okay, that's interesting. That's quite helpful. So then you can win a deal off the back. Your credibility of having the UK business is incredibly useful in winning a platform deal. Then you do the platform deal, you go through the process, you invest in the platform further for that platform deal. So, for example, in Ireland, we're building in some commission modules that are not required in the UK because it's illegal. You can't pay commission. And some other bits and pieces, target day funds rather than lifestyling, for example. So we're building in additional features into the platform for that Irish deal. That then enhances the UK platform so that our Smart Pension then becomes a better provider.
Doesn't enhance it with the illegal bits. You're not adding
well,
that
not the bit. So we don't do that. But the things we invest in develop. So there's a whole bunch of complicated commissions, so complicated fees and things like that. For example, in Ireland, which we're modelling out and building out, and that's then we're refactoring some of our code, and that then improves our platform. So it goes. So then Smart Pension does better, and therefore we win more platform deals. And so you go around in circles. It's actually incredibly valuable to have both parts. So if you look at platforms, there are a number of companies that you could name, FNZ, Bravura, a number of others who we would particularly regard as competitors, but they don't do the front end. They don't have real actual customers.
They don't eat their own dog food.
No, exactly. So, that's a great point. So we can prove that we can do it, but we can also use Smart in the UK as a way of experimenting. It's a sort of shop window, but it's also our lab. So we're doing things around financial planning and financial education and things which are not even related to pensions. We're testing them and rolling them out into the UK platform for our Smart Pension customers to prove their work, to demonstrate, and then that enhances the value of the platform. So if you're a Smart Pension UK customer, you're going to get way more attention and development of the proposition than you would expect to because of the being part of this bigger group.
Yes, as opposed to the completely opposite strategy would have been, okay, we're purely an AE play in the UK, that's matured now. Well, actually, there's a little bit of competition for, rotating accounts, and we'll just aim at that. At which point, our business, which had drawn stumps at that point, wouldn't be investing in the platform in particular because there would be nothing in it. Okay, I get that. So then very briefly, and it is simply true, it's not being flattering, you have compared to your presumably initial expectations 12 years ago in terms of selling flowers and whatever it must be by now 7 years ago in terms of doing pensions. If you were crazy, you would have had wild expectations and you've met them or perhaps you've surpassed them in both cases. So where does that leave you now? And in one case, it's over a decade, which is quite a long time. Where does that leave you now? Do you just kind of keep multiplying your ambition, as it were, tenfold all the time? Or are there elements that are you looking forward in with both these businesses to sort of listing them on the market or going sort of so global and being the number one flower seller globally? I mean, you mentioned about plans get bigger and bigger, but I mean, are you like a sort of Bezos? Do you just keep going an unlimited fashion and until somehow you hit a ceiling somehow? I mean, what's the actual practice thing? Because most people, most of the time in life have to deal with modest success or a certain degree of failure. But what's it like when it actually does all work out one way or another.
So that's very flattering, and it's a lovely picture you paint. The fact that I had a full head of hair 12 years ago when I started, so I was sitting in front of a bald man. Yeah, exactly. It probably tells a different story, and I'm fairly certain my family would attest to some of the stresses that have gone along the way. But I mean, the flower business is a really good business. It is run by a managing director called John, who's just awesome. So I'm still the main shareholder and all the rest of it. My shareholders, who are my angels who came in 2006 and 2008, I think would quite rightly are somewhat agitated for them to me to give their money back. And so that annoys me in some regard. I have no desire to exit that business. I think it's a really good business. We just moved it to a new warehouse. We're replatforming the website. We're winning lots of clients. It's just going really, really well. I think it's by far the best flower delivery business in this country and possibly on earth. So it's a brilliant thing, and it's just really, I know it sounds ridiculous to say this, but it's getting ahead of steam now, big time. But it's taken us a long time to get there because we did things bootstrapped the first time round, like properly bootstrapped, and that was probably a mistake, and that's taken it longer to go. But I would love to get my liquidity for my existing shareholders, but that's on a course, a trajectory where it will continue to grow, and I have no need. We are not VC minded or whatever way, we're going to get out in X number of years.
Yeah.
I love it succeeding. Arena is just awesome. So that's that. And with Smart, it's a little bit too early to know where the journey goes, but the size of the potential market in the business is just insane. So it's really, really fun running it, and it's really intellectually challenging. And I work incredibly well with my co-founder, and we have a very large and very strong management team, so they're all awesome. But Andrew and I run the business together, and I work incredibly well with him. I don't want to do the stuff he really likes doing, and vice versa. And we don't argue on Fallout. I don't argue Fallout with John either, actually, so I'm very lucky in that regard. So it's an incredibly enjoyable experience. I think that with both businesses, I think what is generally the case is they both do a really nice thing. So sharing love and happiness and sorrow and birthdays and so forth is nice in the flower business. Helping people save money for their retirement and for a better future is also a nice thing to do. And so I don't see people, of course, want liquidity and people want these kinds of things. But we don't spend time thinking, when are we going to sell this? When are we going to float it? All that. So we think, how do we capitalise on opportunity and deliver an awesome product to people, be it in either business, really. So I didn't really answer your question, but
I wasn't after sort of the answer's 42 or 15 and a half. It's more the thinking that goes behind it. There will be people in fintech in London who are, in a sense, catching you guys up, and some are arguably perhaps a little bit ahead in terms of the numbers of clients, with Revolut at
miles ahead, yeah.
6 million. And I suspect that my feeling on this is that it's exactly where we started in terms of aeroplanes, which is that when you've been doing everything, literally quotes, within the Circle Line and popping outside the Circle Line in central London, that's got one set of parameters. As you say, you're now aiming at several huge markets, some of which are a very long way away. And just going back to the end of the imperial times, with Claremont Benson, we had offices in a number of countries around the world, but there was one management team, and there was, in practice, as I saw, with that scale of organisation, there's only a number of fires that a management team can cope with at a given time. Japan was always a right pain in the arse for us in the 1980s. Very exciting, growing very well and all that kind of stuff, but losing money hand over fist. The more business you did, the more money we lost. We never particularly, as Claremont's, penetrated well into the States, so there's always challenges over there. So once your business is in, shall we say, N overseas locations, and each of them is posing a different set of challenges, the management team then gets pulled in such a direction that actually it can't sort them out all the time. So I think it's more just a question of, you're going into huge markets. I mean, you mentioned the likes of Japan, Australia, America. They're vast. That's going to keep you busy for a while. It's not a question like the podcast, where certainly for the first few years, I mean, I think I've capped out at about 180 countries at the moment, but for the first few years, every month I'd do another 10 countries, because the marginal cost of supply of a podcast to Bangladesh or Greenland is zero. I would not be in 180 countries if I had to visit them all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we this is the other thing when we get asked a lot, is how are you going to manage all these different things. Part of the answer is that we may have 10 clients, but they're all using one platform. Now, of course, that's not quite like that, but there's a sort of principle there, which is you're buying your UX, your front end, whatever, but actually underneath it, the engine is still the same. That's one point. The second point is around, we recognise that in every country that we go into, we'd have to have at least a country manager, but a big country would have probably 2 or 3 super senior people who are probably more experienced and better paid than we are, and who are basically absolute big hitters, who can be trusted to run the thing on the ground and make it, execute on the ground, and they don't, not with reference to us every 5 minutes, especially like Australia, for example. But anyway, in any case, that general broad principle applies, that we will not succeed if we don't hire awesome people into the business, and in our international strategy, awesome country managers and COOs and all the rest of it to help run those units. And the third thing is we spent a lot of time this year and last year, the last 18 months or so, figuring out how to run the business in this new mode, I suppose you'd say.
Phase change.
Yeah, exactly. How the hell we can do that? So Andrew and I broadly don't have any day-to-day responsibility anymore for running teams. It's a recent reorg to tweak some more bits around that, so that we have an awesome management team of about 25 people now, but we have another senior executive team, 5 or 6 of us. We basically have to figure out how we can have the brain space to figure stuff out, delegate, to enable, empower people to make decisions, and so on and so on. So just that kind of, we're not done yet by any means, but we spend a lot of our time thinking about how to build and structure the business, how to run the business, how does the engineering team work. So my dad, as you know, ran a big factory in Congo, Zaire, a British Leyland factory, and I used to, like, when I was a kid, I'd go to the factory and an axle would start on one end of the assembly line, and the other end there was a Land Rover that drove off around the test track, which is quite fun as a kid to be driven around that. But anyway, that sort of stuff, like really logically thinking stuff through, how do you put this together, how does this work, is kind of what we do. So we're building a similar sort of thing, but it just happens to be a more abstract thing, which is a business.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's a nice way of wrapping it up, actually, because we start with the metaphorical couple of guys, and it tends to be guys, girls perhaps not so crazy as to do these sort of hugely risky things and give up stable careers. A couple of guys in a pub, oh yeah, let's have a strategy, our strategy is this, and then you spend most of the time execution. And then, as you say, as time goes by, and it'll be the same for Nick at Revolut, Tom at Monzo, as time goes by, the management job becomes strategic.
Yeah, exactly.
It isn't tactical. I mean, you've got 250 people below you or whatever. It shouldn't require you to go and empty the sort of bin or something like that, metaphorically speaking.
I do change the water cooler thing, which people find quite amusing, but a man's got to have cold water.
Well, exactly, yes, and also you've got to play to your skill set. Okay, right, before we wrap up the show, I'd like to thank all the listeners out there, particularly all of you who've been ill recently, particularly anybody who's had the Black Death. It isn't a bunch of fun, so I hope you're shaking it off nicely. I'd like to thank my wonderful brand partners of the podcast. You forgot to mention, Will, that the reason for your global dominance is you've been the longest sponsor of the London Fintech podcast, which I'm very grateful for.
The secret of our success.
Exactly, secret of your success and getting the word out. And actually, it's about time. I should have done this before, actually. I should have grabbed you and updated your brand message, but we'll do that separately. Smart Pension, who are fast, secure and free. Check out their UK workplace pensions at autoenrollment.co.uk, and I'll have to get a bit from you later about all the other millions of things that people should check you out for. So, wrapping up the show, you have succeeded beyond your wildest dreams. You've spoken around a lot of the issues there. I think people, especially those on the journey themselves, will get a good feeling for the kind of thought process one goes through. They will recognise the various stages. I mean, another way that I was feeling about it when you were talking is a bit like it's going through school. Our kids are the opposite ends of the sort of spectrum on this one. But you're a junior school and you're senior school and you've got exams, and then you're a sort of sixth former and you're thinking really big, you're in the upper sixth, and then you're at the bottom of the university and yada, yada, yada. So it is a question of growth, literally, no pun intended. So in terms of the millions of people listening to you, would you like to cast your breadcrumbs upon the water for those people who weren't concentrating on the implicit messages or the implicit breadcrumbs, if a breadcrumb can be implicit? And indeed, would you like to rescue me from muddling my metaphors anymore?
Yes, exactly. I'll scoop you off the pond. This is my craven pitch. So if you are a financial services business interested in the asset class of pensions, which is a $42 trillion thing, or if you are even involved in government and are trying to solve your pension time bomb, we are delighted to talk to anyone about those topics. We're also hiring, so if you're a developer, or we're hiring in lots of different areas, but we're a tech team in particular. So we are based in Paddington, and we have a nice office. So we are hiring and we want awesome people. So then if that's the case, then visit our careers page. We would love to hear from you. And then finally, I think, don't forget your old mum. It's Mother's Day pretty soon. Actually, Mother's Day is on the Sunday of Brexit week. So God knows what's going to happen then. But if you're in the market for flowers for your mother for Mother's Day, do visit arenaflowers.com. We came with the number one ethical flower brand in the UK, and us and our partners came 1, 2 and 3 in 2 separate surveys before Valentine's Day, which I think has never been achieved before, which is hats off to John and his team.
Wow. What's an ethical flower, just in passing?
So we got 100 out of 100 from the Good Shopping Guys ethical rating. We're the only business at all of any sector to have ever scored 100 out of 100 on their report. So we've come top of it for the last 4 years, and we've got a perfect score this year, which is nice.
Oh, right, OK. Maybe I should apply for the most ethical podcast, or the podcast with the lowest carbon footprint or something like that.
You would need someone to back you up on that, Mike, and I'm not sure that I can be convinced.
No, I'm very unethical and very high carbon footprint. Excellent. Well, it was an amazing episode, better part of 3 years ago, and you have been stellarishly successful since, and it'll be very interesting to come back in a few years' time and hear the next stage of your journey. In all joking apart, as anybody outside the UK, and 40% of listeners in the UK will know, it's a pretty depressing time to be in the UK these days, long since the glory days, or long since any sense of professionalism. But it is good to be reminded, and again, when I was on the guest of the podcast, they were asking me what it's like to be a podcaster, and I genuinely said that I am extremely fortunate in terms of meeting people who are really doing something of great importance and doing it really well. And despite all the disadvantages of the UK, which are not insignificant these days, it's nevertheless the case that in London, you've got some people building great businesses which are nice places to work, they're offering employment, and they're going out there in the world and making the rest of the world a better place in a small way in terms of helping people with their pensions. As you say, it's very important. And the decumulation, I definitely want your product for that, because Bridget and I were sitting around working out how many more 1,000 years we need to work before we retire. But and in all seriousness, one of the practicalities is that there are very few tools out there to help you work it out. I mean, some very clever friends of mine, my first CTO in Bath a million years ago, 35 years ago, they retired some time ago, and I remember them saying they spent a long time building some models themselves, super tech people, the two of them actually, as to work out when they should take their pension. And these are really clever people, spent their whole life in tech, and they have to work at a big model. So it's a very big thing. So I wish you every success in the future, and good luck with the melanin tablets or whatever it is you need to keep flying around the world.
Thank you. Thanks for your support as well.
Thanks for listening. If you have consulting, advisory/non-exec or media needs in the FS or fintech space, get in touch with me at mike@londonfintechpodcast.com.
We could sit in a vendor all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moon ride, watching a happy moon ride. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the firelight dance.